everyone. I'm Priyanka Sharma, and I'm the Executive Director of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. If you haven't heard about us, you probably live under a rock. I'm just kidding. CNCF, as we are called, we are the home for Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy, and like 100 plus projects besides that, and host critical infrastructure technology components that, as you may be aware, have created this whole ecosystem of cloud native computing. I have a long history in the developer tools space, have been deeply engaged with Heavybit for a long time. I used to work at a portfolio company called Lightstep and then served as an advisor to the organization. After Lightstep, I was at GitLab, where I was director of alliances, technical evangelism, served on the CNCF board, and then finally ended up in my current role. So I spend a lot of time around developers, developer products, and so far, no plans to go anywhere else because this is a great space to be. Today, I have with me some amazing founders who have built great products for developers, and we're going to talk to them about how they conceptualized what they were going to build, what was their vision, and then once they executed on this vision, how did they continuously do developer discovery? Or, in other words, how did they continuously stay engaged with their audience, with their users, know what feedback to take, where to iterate, how to do that, so that they're continually successful beyond that initial spark of an idea? So, without further ado, I would love to have our panelists introduce ourselves. Rajoshi, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and really nice to meet all of you here. I'm Rajoshi. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO at Hasura. I come from a bioinformatics and genomics background, but that's really like back in the past. I've been spending most of my time at Hasura working with the marketing and community teams. I've been working with developers and product creators for the last 10 years of my life. So this is a space that I'm deeply passionate about. At Hasura, just for those of you who haven't heard of Hasura, Hasura is an open source product that gives developers instant GraphQL and REST APIs on their data. What does that mean? Hasura allows the developers who are closest to building experiences, for your users, the access to the data that they need without any layers in the middle, be it software or people even. So that's Hasura. Again, happy to be here and looking forward to hear from everyone here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Rajoshi, and welcome. Magnus, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Franca. I'm Magnus Hillstein, CEO and co-founder of Sanity.io. Very glad to be here. Sanity is a platform for structured content. We help businesses build better digital experiences by providing a platform for structured content. It's a developer tool that helps developer build a new CMS in the way that the businesses really should have it. So it's a developer tool that also serves a broader organization and tries to unify the way companies work with content. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Magnus. And then last but not least, David.
Hi, all. I'm David Carney. I'm the COO and co-founder of Tailscale. Tailscale, for those of you who don't know, it's what some people would call a next generation VPN. It's a full mesh, incrementally deployable overlay network that's built on top of WireGuard. So a lot of people will use it as, say, an incremental zero trust solution or an open VPN replacement for interconnecting their devices, servers, what have you, no matter where they are in the world. It acts just effectively like a LAN did back in the 90s, but designed for like the modern day security.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, welcome to all of you. I did the intros in order of my favorite founder first. I'm just kidding. So now the toughest questions will go in reverse order. No, nothing like that. So, folks, you all are building dev tools, but totally different spaces, right? We have a CMS, we have a VPN, we have a GraphQL API. Sorry, I did that wrong. Rajoshi, how should I describe actually Hasura in like one line?
I think we have a GraphQL solution.
Okay, so I didn't get that totally wrong, which makes me feel great. So Rajoshi, tell me, what vision did you and your co-founders had that made you decide that we are going to be a GraphQL solution? This is the place where we're going to make a difference.
Absolutely. So yeah, this goes back a long time. My co-founder Tanmay and I, we started building a couple of products, and we realized that the process of building an application just takes a lot of time and a lot of learning. You just have to learn too many things across the stack, right? So, we sort of got to this, we got to a shared sort of feeling of there has to be an easier way of doing this. And so we wanted to make application development easier. But that was a big vision, and we did not really immediately see how that would be a product or a business. So that was the vision, and so how we started out was actually as a consulting, and services firm, where we just said, let's just build a lot of products for lots of different types of companies, different industries, and we always had a team that was, building tooling that could be used across these products, right? So we sort of came to this product that made our team super productive. And that sort of was the genesis of Hasura. But in terms of when we launched it as a company, we realized what we built was a larger platform. We started taking it apart. And one piece in this entire puzzle was the data access piece, which is the piece where, which we realized after speaking to a lot of people was the biggest bottleneck in this application development space. There was a lot of innovation happening on the front end space. Databases were getting more, modern, lots of innovation there. But that piece in the middle, which just is the piece that, put it very simply, gets the data from where it's stored into the hands of the developers, seemed like it was very bloated. So we realized that that was the biggest bottleneck, and also something that could add value to businesses right off the bat, all sizes and shapes. So that's how we came at the problem. So we didn't actually come at the problem from GraphQL first. We had a version of GraphQL, I think, kind of maybe building it around the same time GraphQL was being born. But it was very similar in solving the same problems. So when we came to market, everybody was like, you should just speak GraphQL. So then we kind of, GraphQL was kind of the tailwind, or almost the language to communicate this data access piece that we were solving. So that's sort of how we, went from that vision, which was still the same. It's still making application development easier, but the way we solved it evolved along the way.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, people say vision, mission, execution, and it's like you kind of narrow the funnel as you go, it seems like. What is your story like, David, on that front?
There's, I guess, a bunch of parallel stories I could tell, but the main one was that in very early days, the three of us co-founders, we complained a lot. And it was, we all were sort of seeing the way things had gone, I guess, with like network connectivity and cloud computing. I'm in my 40s now. I started, working in the field in the 90s. And I remember sort of how easy it was back in the day to set up a network, to set up an application, to bootstrap a simple service. And like, there's been a lot of change between then and now, and things like SaaS like opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for new businesses. But having worked in SaaS over the past decade, every year things seem to get harder. Right? Like why do I need to worry about all these problems and security concerns when trying to set up a simple dashboard? Like why do I need to worry about authentication? Why do I need a cluster and a DevOps team to bootstrap an application? And so like these are the kinds of problems that really bothered us as a team. And so we set out basically to start talking with customers about how to solve them. And that's where we, over like weeks and months, we slowly started chipping away at the problem and narrowing it down to something where we thought that, in particular, like network connectivity and security were areas that we had expertise in, and that we could actually make a difference. And so we narrowed the problem further and further down until we found a way to essentially, from a certain point of view, bring back networking to like the simplicity, or rather the way it was in the 90s, I guess, but for the modern day. So really trying to eliminate a lot of like the common problems, or like the explosion of problems that people have to deal with nowadays.
Makes sense. And has that been evolving, changing over time, or maybe refining?
Oh, for us, definitely refining. We started with, in addition just to talking with like literally, I think it was about 100 or 150 different people and organizations over the first 6 months, just interviewing them, asking them like, what kinds of problems are you working with? Like, what are the kinds of problems you don't want to deal with? Like, what's slowing you down? In parallel to that, we started talking with a bank. And that bank had a lot of existing problems. And in particular, their problem was they had a lot of legacy infrastructure. And they wanted to secure it with two-factor authentication. They couldn't without doing a significant rewrite. And they approached us to figure out how to do it. And we thought it was going to be a rather sort of simple off-the-shelf solution. And after we did a fair bit of research, we realized it wasn't. And so we actually built like an initial prototype of what later became Tailscale, but it was just a way to use WireGuard in conjunction with our identity provider to control access on the networking level to like legacy resources. And we launched this for them, set it up, and it worked. Granted, it was full of bugs and stuff like that at the time, but then we realized and reflected on all the previous conversations we'd had, and we sort of took the same idea back to all these people who've been complaining about these different problems, and we're like, well, would this solve it in this particular way? And then all these lights started going off as people sort of started realizing. So that's when we realized we were onto something, and that's when the vision became much more narrow and turned a bit more of a mission of like, we're going to make the world, adhere to this vision, specifically by addressing like network connectivity and security.
Sweet. Awesome. You touched on a bunch of things around developer discovery too, and I am eager to come back to those. But really quickly, Magnus, I'd like to hear your journey and story around how your vision came to be and what is it today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Our story is a bit different, but also starting as an agency. My co-founders had an agency. I wasn't part of it back then. And there's a really famous architect in Rotterdam. It's called Rem Koolhaas. And my co-founder is running this tech agency, building bespoke software for people. And his team approached them because they've been on Vice with some of the products they made and said, could you rebuild our website? Could you build us out of WordPress? And it wasn't a web agency, so it wasn't the kind of work they did. But because he's like Michael Jackson of architecture, they said yes. And said, okay, let's build something really cool, and it needs to be really bespoke. And the whole focus was on the front end, really. What ended up being OMA.eu, and it's still that product today. But what they quickly figured out was that the problem in the back end, there's old CMSs. They don't do the work. If you want to do something that is really bespoke and really magical, there's no software for actually letting you do that. So they built up something to enable them to build this highly rule-based website, etc. And having built that, so that was pretty cool. And went on to build something with MIT, Center of Advanced Visual Studies, which is kind of like an image carousel. Still stuff you can't really build with the CMS as a backend. And in order to enable developers who build these amazing tools with content managers and have them work together and have them iterate and have them continue to develop these amazing experiences, Sanity was then born. And it took a couple of years and a rebuilding, actually, before it ended up being Sanity, that we launched in 2017, right at the end of the year. The vision has always been the same. That's why we often say we're not a headless CMS. It does the same, but the vision was never to take a CMS and add an API to it. We come from the complete opposite side. We think CMSs are inherently terrible. And I think different from some of these other stories, the North Star, or not the North Star, but the guinea pigs of this and the user in the beginning was just ourselves. And it continued to be for a long time. So it wasn't until we really launched, it was a tiny couple of before that, but really when we launched, that we started to get external customers and then started iterating with them and started to talk to them a lot. So it's a little bit different. But the vision is mainly still the same, and we still only built like 10% of that whole vision.
Right. Okay. So you're staying true to that high level vision, and this is one way of executing.
I think so, yeah. I think it probably the way we talk about it and some of the features, we're still building features that was thought of in the initial spec, and we still added to that. I think the way we think about it has changed, and the way we're articulating it is changing all the time. But the core story for us, at least, has always been the same.
Okay. So if I'm hearing correctly, the vision is in some ways immutable, but it's also that way because it's visionary. LOL. The vision is at a higher level, so the execution can comfortably change and iterate, and you can still be attacking that same end problem. Am I following that right, founders?
For us, that's true at least. But I think also the vision gets bigger because the opportunity at the beginning kind of seemed smaller, and it was never like, let's conquer the world and let's kill every other CMS. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Let's change the CMS space, right? But it kind of changed into that from that initial product, but it still centers around the same pain points as there was. Just the opportunity, the way we see it, is much bigger.
So one interesting thing about this vision that all of you developed is that it came from your own experiences as development teams, and Magnus, in your case, your co-founders were in that boat. Now you folks are in a different position of being founders and organization leaders. Do you still feel you are the user for what you have built?
The short answer is yes, and I was, I guess, quickly outpaced by my peers. Like I'm an engineer by training. The people I work with can run circles around me, in terms of their technical abilities. But from very early on, we built Tailscale for us, really, and then it was just very fortunate that a lot of other people had the same kind of problems, and they wanted to take up the solution and eventually start paying for it. I think there's a lot to be said for what we've built so far. I'm sure that the features that we are building, they're going to quickly outpace our needs internally, and then it's going to be an interesting question of, how do we build stuff for customers where we're not the users at this point. But right now we're still in a very a sweet spot where we're building it for ourselves and our customers, and it's a great feeling.
Absolutely. This is something that's been very core to us. It's sort of the genesis of Hasura. But as we've moved forward, from agency to the product company that we are today, we've continued to try and find ways to continue to use Hasura. The fact that we're open source has always kind of kept us very close to the community, and the feedback loop is always available. But building it internally, using it internally has always been something we wanted to do. And our managed cloud solution, Hasura Cloud, uses Hasura, and that's a big. We're a huge user of Hasura, the core engine. So I think that's how we continue to use it in a big way. But the community teams, the open source aspect of it keeps us really close to our users, and that's kind of how we've stayed close to users and product.
We also do that, and we use Sanity for a lot of things. Like we just now get some I say proper support system, but we built the support system on Sanity first. We built a bunch of things on Sanity because you could use it for so much. And I think it's great to have that team. I think it's essential because it makes it authentic and all those things. It's also a weakness, though, because I can see that as we dive further and further into this project, we get so close to it. We see so many issues that can bother us, but we lose the blessing of ignorance and the fresh look on this. So we try to use every new employee to get a fresh look, but even then we often have people who already know about Sanity. So I think it's a super strength, but a strength to be cautious with and find ways where we can find other perspectives. And also because a lot of our developers are extremely skilled and they become very skilled in Sanity. And how do you find people who are fresh to this? So we're focusing actually almost as much on that, and we have a huge community, and that's also a blessing where we can find that. So if you find the right balance, that's when you find the superpower, I think.
This leads me to the next section of our conversation, right, which is around developer discovery. You all built something that you knew was a pain point. You created it, you started using it, other people joined you in that journey. Now, presumably, there are more other people than you folks, right? And so you have to do the difficult job of learning from what their experiences are, understanding them, looking at product usage data as well as what people think and how they talk about your product. And then there is, going back to that vision piece, your own point of view, which just may sometimes compel you to build something which maybe nobody said anything about. So I'm in this section of the conversation. My first question to you is, what is your process for qualitative feedback? Do you do user interviews, and how have you structured that? And then we'll talk the same thing about quantitative and go from there. So maybe, David, you can start us off.
I mean, in very early days, it was us just reaching out to people and asking for, very 20 to 30 minutes. Can you spare time over your lunch break? Can we bounce ideas off you? Can you tell us, the pains you're fighting with? And then we would try to end every conversation with, can you refer us to somebody else to whom we should speak? And sometimes those would be dead ends. Sometimes it'd be great conversations, because then us founders would go off and spend like the next 30 minutes just talking about all the answers. Once we started actually building and launching a product and customers were starting to use it, I think it really just comes down to the fact that our engineers were our support staff. And we were just talking with customers on a daily basis. That's still the case. Like, we don't have everybody on the engineering side, obviously, like on frontline support, but it's still very, very tightly integrated. And because it is a product that we use internally, and then it is an extremely technical product, the feedback, like, we feel the customer's pain very quickly. And so it's, things become urgent when, I guess to say, the urgency is conveyed very quickly. Like, we can feel customers' pain with, like, I guess, not much of a delay. So that's been very helpful with keeping us on track.
I mean, if I may dig a little deeper, I think I absolutely agree. There are segments of your users where you will feel the pain very quickly and empathize really fast. But the bank you mentioned earlier, I would guess you folks are building a very different organization, a very different product. And so the concerns and challenges that a large bank might have using your product would be different from what you folks' inherent experience is. So how do you kind of look at feedback from folks who have a, to use the word different again, different perspective and needs, and then do they come first? Do they come last? How do you structure the feedback?
Well, that's actually one of the, I guess, the beautiful things about Tailscale is that it's designed to be incrementally deployable by small teams. Like, so we intentionally don't go after the conventional, I guess, approach to VPNs, which is a top-down sale. It's designed to be the kind of thing that an individual can, tinker with at home and bring into work, start sharing some devices with a colleague, and then it expands from there. And so, even with this bank in particular, like, they were like definitely not a massive organization, but the people we were dealing with there, it was like the head of IT and then one of their colleagues. And we literally started with an extremely small rollout, just with a handful of users. And so there was just like a lot of incremental feedback all throughout the deployment up to, like, a couple of hundred employees. If it were more of a top-down sale with a very different kind of organization and an enterprise, we would have been very different, almost like mixing oil and water with the way our team works, which is the way those customers work. But we intentionally, in early days, we decided, no, we're not building an enterprise-first product. We're doing it bottoms up, like very product-led growth, which is unusual in this space, but it's worked really well for us.
So would you say that the bank has become a design partner?
I suppose. I mean, Tailscale is designed to get out of your way as quickly as possible. And so it's almost like anti-design. Like, you will install it and it will disappear and everything kind of just works. It's actually, in some ways, it's detrimental because then people forget that we're even running, and then,
it's like our investors under the hood. Is it even there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are some great tools like that we use too, and I forget that we're paying for them until, like, the invoice shows up now and then. But I mean, the bank was instrumental in a lot of the feedback and debugging and some of the early feature requests, and honestly, just getting the feedback from their users of, like, for instance, like us as a team, we use a lot of Linux and Mac OS internally, not so much Windows, whereas the bank is a heavy Windows user. And so it uncovered certain problems and things that we just haven't thought to solve for. And so that was, like, invaluable, right? But at the same time, we have sort of opinions on how networking should work, and we could bounce this off the bank and sort of incorporate that into, I guess, our deployment with them. So it was like a mutual way to exchange information and learn from each other.
Got it. So design partner light, where it's not a formal engagement, but you are going back and forth and working together to build something out. Okay.
Yes.
Rajoshi, you have the open source component in your product, so you probably naturally get so much inbound feedback and ideas and thoughts. How do you look at it? How do you prioritize? Who do you go after and then call multiple times to get detailed information?
I'd like to sort of share the initial days, of when we were sort of making that transition into what was the product, right? So once we added GraphQL, once Hasura sort of had that GraphQL support where you instantly got GraphQL, it was a new product. We were just prepping it for launch, and it wasn't really a product feedback exercise that we did as much as it was a messaging feedback exercise that we did at that point, because we kind of built this product over the years. So, we had, say, the 5 key features that we were really excited about, that everyone in the product and engineering team were like, this is amazing, right? So we kind of pretty much put that onto a spreadsheet, reached out to everybody. This is getting very tactical, but I think it's interesting from, I guess, like, early founder sort of journey. We pretty much reached out to most people who were working in GraphQL at that point, and to whoever would respond to our emails and talk to us. Thank you, all you folks, and pretty much went through these 5 things, right, and said, and just sort of watched their expressions, right, and sort of saw whether, like, the things that we were excited about, and we might have been excited about it because the engineering was really cool, or it was a really hard problem, any, like, different things, right, but just seeing that feedback in terms of what excited them, what would make them try Hasura, given it was like absolutely new, gave us amazing input into how we spoke about the product when we launched. What did we, and that was actually very interesting. Like, some of the things that we really downplayed were the things that people really got excited about, like instant subscriptions or something. And so we really, like, when we went out of the website, we really took that feedback in, and that was very helpful in that initial spike launch developer virality piece. So that was, I think, a very a sort of different feedback gathering experience. But now, as we sort of go on, I think, yeah, like, open source plays a huge role. We look at, like, most upvoted issues that's looked at by the product team, and we sort of, use that to sort of prioritize. And of course, we also have, our enterprise users who are also sort of, who also have product feature requests, but somehow it sort of all ends up in GitHub, right? So that becomes, so, a user is a user, right? And so that kind of really helps us prioritize and take in things and build it into the product. One key sort of point that we've realized as we've spoken to lots of users over the years is that when you're speaking to developers, and when people are sort of giving you their ideas of what you should be adding, it's very feature specific. It's like, I want this feature, but I think being able to sort of dig deeper one level to what is the problem that they're trying to solve, it's not easy, but I think that's, if we're able to get that insight, we've seen that helps us design a better solution for the problem, which may or may not always look the same as the feature request, right? And has actually ended up in providing more elegant solutions that are more scalable and whatnot. So I think that's one tip for, like, interviews that from what we've seen with our customers.
Makes sense. So, Magnus, I'll ask you this slight twist on the question. In your organization, how would you rank qualitative feedback, which can be interviews, it can be GitHub issues, anything that's said or asked for, versus quantitative information, which is, actual production usage data, what you see in your telemetry, versus instinct from the founding team, from the product leadership of, like, I really think we should go build that. How do you rank those when you're deciding what to do next?
If you change the last one to the team, not just the founding team, because we have lots of people on the team that would chime in and have great ideas on the product. So we have, and I wouldn't say this is a good thing, but because Sanity is half open source, so it's a database product we call the Content Lake, and there's an open source application that is the Sanity Studio. Because that's open source, we're very careful about putting in telemetry in the beginning, because we've always been extremely focused on taking down the friction and making it easy for developers to use us. Which resulted us only having, like, the data stream of the API calls instead of actually having any telemetry into the actual application. I think we should have don a lot more. If we were to do it again, we've done a lot more there in the beginning. There are ways to do that where developer thinks it's okay. Yeah.
Everyone listen to that. I am an angel investor and advisor, and people are constantly asking this question, that should we just not do any telemetry? And it's like, no, please don't do that. And I think that's what you're saying, right?
It's like that. There are so many things we think about developers that aren't necessarily true. Developers, yes, maybe you won't get 100%. You can have opt-in. You can have opt-in, opt-out. There are ways to do it, but you don't need 100%. So you can get that data, because that would give you a much better image. So we have had little of that. We're working on that, so there will be things coming that way. We're also building a better organization. We're 70 people now, so we got a product manager, we have analytics people, so it's very different. What we did do well, though, in the beginning are two things that I recommend people to do. We're also PLG, so product-led growth, meaning it's free. We want as many people in every presentation, everything you see from us, community comes first before revenue and enterprises. Now, I think a lot of startups are, so we did two things. The first thing we did that I'm proud of and that was good is that we emailed every single sign up in the beginning. Everyone. And we asked them just one question. What kind of feedback do you want to give us? There was nothing, we weren't trying to sell it. We're still not trying to sell it to the community. And really get that. And we would jump on the phone with someone administering a website for a small church in Milwaukee or someone working for Procter & Gamble. And actually, it wouldn't matter for us because we wanted that span to make sure we clearly saw quickly we wanted to be ubiquitous. And but we're also a product, so that's the one thing I recommend people to do. The other thing is to be bold because we're also a product that quickly gets enterprise attention because the problems we're solving, they are exponentially worse for a complex organization. So after 6 months, we had companies like Burger King, etc., contacting us. And I think that the advice I would give people then is to be very careful on what your motive is for starting to work with these kind of companies. We turned down some very large American organizations because we saw this would drive the product the wrong way. They have the wrong expectations. They would work with us the wrong way. We would not build features for Burger King. We still don't. We build features for the community and the broad. We build for enterprise sometimes, of course, and we're building a business and our revenue is growing well. But we're always being careful of the kind of enterprises that we then would play with. And if that's difficult, rather don't have it. And I think especially if you really have high ambitions to grow really fast, a lot of people are afraid that VCs would ask you to have revenue. So you really get that going. I think that's completely wrong. That's the wrong VCs. Don't work with them. Work with those who understand, like Heavybit, to understand the reason for like this bottom-up motion. But of course, you would have to understand how people would buy your things. But you want the right kind of enterprises. And if you manage to do that, great. Then you could get something that continues to be ubiquitous. Because I don't think you have to choose in this 1, 2, 3 sales way. If you listen to Adam Gross and those kind of things, you can actually get that balance. It's harder, but if you get it right, it's that leads you to exponential growth, I think.
So I want to double click a little bit so that hopefully the audience can get more out of this very meaty answer you just gave. When you say, let's say an enterprise like Burger King is asking for certain features, you have in the past said no. But if there is a community member or developer who happens to work at the Burger King and they have certain asks, does that change the dynamic? Can you give examples of some things that you say yes to and some things you say no?
We don't just say no. We're empathic people, and we say we understand, and this is why we're thinking like this and that, and we may do this at the right time. But I think of all the enterprise customers also being in the community, but of course it has a little bit of difference if you're sitting discussing someone who wants to buy your software just being the organization. So still developers inside the organization. So what has always been guiding us is that if it doesn't benefit the community, think twice before you think about making it.
So what I want to ask you really quickly, Magnus, though, is when you say we will build it if it's good for the community. So what do you mean by that? Is that like basically all the users or
So when I say community, I mean all the users. So if it doesn't benefit a small organization, now this is special for us because we want this ubiquitousness. It may be different for other companies, but for us, if it doesn't benefit a smaller team, what we want to build, we should think twice. Sometimes we do that. It could be security features, it could be other things. But I think especially what you want to watch out for is these use cases and features that drive you down a particular path. Because very often, sad as it is, these enterprises, they need to solve a problem, but they don't have the same criteria for solving that problem. They don't look for really low friction, instant gratification on the features and really these aha moments that you really need to win broadly. So if you have big ambitions, you need to listen to those smaller communities because they would go otherwise if you don't convince them in 3 minutes. Whilst the enterprises may have to invest like 10 hours to fix that problem, if you make it really hard for them, they still want to go with you. So we love everyone We just love them in different ways and want to interact with them in different ways. We want to be careful with our motives, and that has guided us from day one. And I also do some angel investing, and I see that that's a problem for a lot of young founders especially when they get traction, and there's money dangling, and they think that's the way to get funding. And I think actually it's not. If you manage to do it right, you could do it right, but there's something in all these jokes from Silicon Valley. Well, you don't really
Yeah.
revenue.
No. Okay, that is really, really helpful. So, continuing on, Rajoshi, I'd like to ask you, in your experience, can you share some time where, people may have asked for a product or a feature request that you have had to make a difficult decision to say no to, not the obvious ones, and just how that's impacted you folks? Do you regret it? Was it great? Would love to hear.
Yeah, we actually have a really interesting answer to this one, and this comes from comes from kind of how we built Hasura again. So, very specifically, it's adding authentication, right?
Right.
People look at Hasura as an application development, like you're building your application on it. We give you data APIs, and so everyone's like, "Why don't you just solve authentication for us?" And we have battle scars. We had authentication APIs from agency, that platform that we sort of broke apart and came went to market with this piece. We had authentication, and we realized that as we sort of spoke to a lot of people at that point, that that doesn't end up scaling. Most people have their own authentication solutions. There are amazing companies solving it. We wanted to make it incredibly easy to integrate and not build it in-house, because that wasn't core to that data access piece. So that's a very specific example, but this has come up a lot because when developers are building, especially because we are also that bottom up community led adoption, and so people kind of want, they're like, I'm already using this. It just feels like, why wouldn't you add this? It makes so much sense. So we've had to say no to that very explicitly, and I bring this up because this is probably like the most asked question that we've had, right? And it's also something we have very strong opinions about. And so it's easy for us to talk about it. And that's because it's really something that's at odds with the vision and the core problem that we're solving, where we can have a 10x impact, right? We're not going to have a 10x impact being your next authentication provider. Having said that, that also means that people want this problem solved. So we're not going to ignore it. We just make the developer experience around integration much better, where that pain point is not something that they feel, and they get comfortable with the plug and playness of it. And I think the good piece is, as some of these companies and teams scale, I think they've seen that, they've sort of come back and realized how that's been it's not too bad, right? The fact that they went with a separate provider. So I think that's one very sort of specific example that we have. But at a sort of more abstract level, I think the way we think about it is that if we are anytime there is a request, which is some kind of bespoke request, right, it comes back to the team, and we look at it from a product vision perspective. It might already be part of the roadmap, but a little bit in the future. Sometimes it's a little bit different from what we had initially thought about, but it felt very compelling, and we could see that it's not a problem for this one user, but we could figure out. And that's again when you're able to talk about the problem and not the specific feature, right? And so if there's conviction that's built out that this is something valuable, and it is also a user that is 90% there with Hasura, and this is helpful, and it's going to help us win not just this user but many more, we have added it in a way that it's kind of a bespoke solution, where we think about it very carefully about how it can be integrated back into the product. Like, that path is planned out, like right from day one. So it's not like, hey, we'll do this and then it's suddenly a different product deployed for this company. No, it's a solution that is designed in a way that it can come back into the product and become a part of that solution. And so it's used for POCs, but it sort of makes its way back. And that's happened a few times, and it's actually added some incredibly interesting features to our product that has been appreciated, not just from the larger companies, but also across the community. So yeah, so we've had some really interesting use cases like that.
Very cool. Very
Can
brave
I
of
add
all
one
of
thing?
you. Sure, Magnus.
Those are thing. This made me think about another thing. I think this was great, and I think there's the same way I said we as users become so into the product that we need to take a step away. The community would help us with that. I think the same thing happens in a community if you have a good community, because you have some people, and those are often those who speak the most, who really love your product and they're fantastic. They're the cornerstone of your community. At the same time, you need to think about what are you trying to solve. And I think that's especially like we need to do a lot more on telemetry. We always had metrics on how people are using Sanity. So one of the things that you really want to ask yourself is, what are you trying to solve? What is because you can't solve everything. And a lot of those users who really engage, they have some problems that are really deep into your product. And especially in the early days, that isn't necessarily what you should go and solve, because your product may be good enough. The best product doesn't win. It's about distribution. It's about taking down the friction in the beginning. This is something we had to tell ourselves many times. And that's often when we say no. We're not going to build that because we're trying to fix this thing that nobody asked about. Because most people in the world have no clue who we are and haven't used it yet. And we're actually making the product for them.
So, David, I want to ask you a different spin on this question, which is, have you ever built something no one asked for, something very esoteric, but because you knew it's going to be useful, even if maybe small subsection of people will use it, either it'll be like just game changer for a certain audience, or it'll help you so much in the marketing, in the go-to market, that it's worth it. Do you have any stories around that?
Yeah, a few come to mind. One of the more recent ones, and it started like a big part of Tailscale is open source. So a lot of our client software is as well, and so that really helped. It helped with our initial just go to market and getting us in the good graces with our community. But it also really helped just in the way we were launching too, because people would often approach us with very esoteric devices, and they're like, "I want to run Tailscale on this. Can you make a build?" And they're like, "Oh, you can make a build for it. Like, here's the code. Like, just go compile it and install it." And in early days, some people with like network addressable storage, like NAS devices, started approaching us, being like, "Can you make a Tailscale client for my Synology NAS?" And we're like, "Well, we don't really have time to do it. Here's the source code." And then very quickly, some people started turning around these things and started publishing like their own, I guess, like branches of our open source repo and support for this, and even writing blog posts about like, "Here's how I got Tailscale running on my NAS." And it got to the point where I guess there was enough, chatter in things on Twitter and Hacker News and elsewhere that were like, "Okay, we should really just do this ourselves because we want to give something back, and we also just sort of want to take maybe not control, but just put more effort into this." And so we did with Synology, and in particular, we reached out to Synology, and they were oddly keen to get sort of to help us out with this stuff as well, because I think their users had also been asking them, like, we need a better remote access solution for NASs. But the long story short, we built and published like an official Synology package and got it into their store, and then literally like the same week, the numbers just jumped, right? And then and it was surprising. Like, I think it was probably 10 times what our CEO was predicting in terms of the impact, right? And it's just, we see it now week over week. And it's just one of those things. It's like, oh my gosh, there's an entire community here we didn't even realize. And I think to the engineering team's credit on our side, like, it didn't require a massive amount of work, but it just required some dedication, right, and some focus to get it through. But now we're in this phase where we're like, what are we missing? Like, what's the next big opportunity? Yeah, exactly. Like, what else should we be doing? And how do we prioritize those? And then we've got this massive list, and probably a lot more uncertainty now. But it's also extremely exciting. But if people have ideas on how to prioritize those, because it's just like we've opened this world of opportunity now. In some ways, it feels like kind of like the early days of Tailscale again, because it's just like, oh, there's all this untapped potential.
Yeah, so sometimes you may uncover by just investigating, going deeper into something go beyond the sniff test is what I'm hearing for when you're looking at a potential product development or a feature to build, because as you found out, you thought it was a small win that was coming, and instead you got a whole community. That's like pretty great.
Yeah, and I think, a big part of that was just getting into the Synology store. I mean, our users, for instance, a lot of people that work that use Tailscale and build, say, their own versions of the client and run it locally, they're extremely capable developers. I'm sure they can do stuff the same way our team can do. But that's not really what unlocked this particular opportunity. There was definitely a business side to it which we didn't understand at the time. And I think as a company grows, it has to just sort of move beyond its comfort zone. And this is what we're learning as well, just like partnerships and integrations and collaborations, and what do those mean for us, and how do we fit into this broader ecosystem? And that's sort of the phase we're in now. We're uncovering there's so many different ways we can work with other people, and it's extremely exciting. But at the same time, how do you go about validating those opportunities and prioritizing them? That's a whole other set of challenges.
Yeah, we see the same. I feel it's it feels like until you have a proper product organization that we're looking at building out now and get a lot of more structure around it, then it really comes down to getting a lot of signal, but then the team together, of course, including founders, but also others on the team, to say, okay, what do we think really makes sense here? What do we have the gut feel? We'll make some good bets, we'll make some bad bets, but I don't think you could quantify your way kind of from a community and all the feedback before you do it properly with product people. That's been my experience, at least. Maybe I don't know if others see it otherwise. We struggle to find a good way to make a good system. We've been making GitHub requests, make all these GitHub issues, look at them, quantify them, and all of those things, and try to go. But the obvious things we know popped up again. I don't know.
I agree. I said, no, that is definitely, that resonates very strongly. We're still trying to problem solve that. We should talk.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. So far, it goes to what David said, like the gut feel and trust yourself, and you'll do some bad. Just because it didn't turn out well doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do. You just have to iterate. Try to keep things small. I think has been a thing for us. The times when we made something really big, we have to have higher conviction. It's also turned out well for us, but it's also often then been on gut feel as well. There's a lot of gut feel, I feel, at least on our side. There's probably better ways to do it, but that's been our journey.
I was just going to say, even back in my GitLab days, iteration is so important because you're bombarded by signals, some of which may be noise, and then you have your own instincts. And so one of the things I remember from my time there was just the minimum viable change, not minimum viable product. And it's funny because now I run an ecosystem, right? And even in that, it's any changes we bring, I'm realizing iteration is key, because nothing works out of the gate the way you think it's going to. Whether it's in people, process, tools, technology, it doesn't matter.
One quick sort of interesting thing that I wanted to point out is sometimes because of, and this has kind of happened, I think, twice with us, which is that, because of sort of the flurry of requests which are of kind of the same type, right? And not being able to service them fast enough, it's resulted over time. It wasn't like, you woke up one day with this, but it's resulted in a slight shift in the product strategy where you're able to make things a little bit more pluggable. And that's amazing when it's an open source community and product, where then suddenly it becomes accessible to folks. And this has actually happened twice for us. One of the things we're working on for next year, one of the things which was, what I was talking about earlier, which is that integration with, the auth providers, but any API, integrations with any API, making that system more pluggable. So, you're not sort of restricted by what Hasura supports, but you're able to kind of go add that. So that's kind of come sometimes from this not being able to service the flurry of requests and being forced to come up with a more elegant solution, which you kind of hadn't thought of earlier.
We've done the exact same thing this year, invested a lot in kind of rebuilding our own stuff so it's easier for us to build, but also easier for the community. Totally with you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's like a big part of the beauty of having open source baked into your product, right? It's like one of the big value adds of having an open source first approach is that people will help you. People will build with you. And there's no way you can build everything everybody wants, but this way they can go do it if they want it enough.
I think also, although you shouldn't always listen, I think this goes for any business, you shouldn't always listen to your customers. They don't know exactly what they should have. But also you have to, of course, listen to them. And I think it's not a challenge because it's only pluses about being open source and having that community. But you do need to pay attention to, although you don't think it's the right thing to build, you still have to sometimes build what the community wants, because if not, they're going to stop caring. So we've seen that at times when we've been very focused on building our own things. To say, okay, we actually been not attending enough to the community, and I think that if you do that over time, they would just not care, because they spend their spare time giving you feedback, and although maybe you have different views and you see a different perspective, then you have to also give the community what they want. So there's just a bunch of balances and trade-offs.
Absolutely. And I think you folks do it every day. And it's not an easy job, but you all seem to be doing a great one of it. And as we draw this session to a close, I would love to ask all of you to share, if you had just one piece of advice to give first-time founders who are figuring all this out, how to transform their vision into a robust product that's used by hundreds, thousands, millions of people, what would you say? And I'd like to start with David.
Thanks. Well, no. I've got a lot of different pieces of advice, especially as an operator. But I think the one I would like to leave this call with is choose a small problem at the beginning, like a specific use case, and get it to 100%. Right. So a lot of companies fall into this trap of always thinking they need to build more and more features, and that's not why they're getting customers. But in reality, it's the fact that they're missing the one thing that would just get everybody else over the line. And so it's really important to realize what those barriers are, as opposed to just trying to keep on adding more and more things.
Fair enough.
I hope I did a good job of expressing that. But
no, totally. Makes sense. What about you, Rajoshi?
100% on what David just said. And sort of to add to that, I think the one thing that I would say is, if you're able to find a natural distribution or an easy distribution channel right from the get-go, then you get to ride on some sort of these tailwinds. So as you're thinking about, what is that one thing that you're solving in a 10x better way, also think about that distribution factor and see if you're able to align with a distribution factor, because then you take that 10x and you figure out that one piece that you're going to hit, and then that immediately, takes you to the close. For us, it was open source and GraphQL, and that made it really easy. It's a narrow set. I mean, is it? But it's very focused. So yeah, that would be my one tip.
So focus in problem that you're solving and the people you're solving for, is what I'm hearing from both.
Or rather, cherry pick an audience, or a distribution channel.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% would underscore that. It's the tailwinds that you get when you get a euphoria in a community is so much bigger than a dispersed product. Magnus, what about you? What would you like to tell the budding founders out there?
Yeah, very good points already mentioned. If I just going to take one more, it would be think about distribution day one. And if you don't think product-led growth and open source and free, go back and think again until you do. Because the only way that you can really win big, if you think big. So it's really hard. It's harder, but it works much better. And there are so many companies doing it successfully. So a lot of founders say, of course, I'll do that. But there are still a lot of founders who find it hard. You cannot do PLG as an afterthought afterwards. It has to come from your heart in the beginning of how you think about it, and find your way to build a community. If you have open source elements or whatever, that's of course makes it easier and fantastic. But there are many ways to build communities. You just have to have that open, that mindset from the beginning. You have to care about the ones who don't pay you because they're part of your product.
Oh, that's a very good way of thinking about it. They are part of the product. That's cool. Awesome. Well, folks, thank you for giving me your precious time today and sharing with all of us here in the Heavybit community your thoughts on developer discovery, product development, and all sharing all these great stories from your journey so far. I am confident that a lot of people have benefited from this, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Definitely did. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.